Oh, most welcome. Thank you for coming. So we'll be looking at this topic here of getting design and construction on the appropriate track. I'll focus mainly on some structural components, but other aspects as well, not so deep into the details. In this course, we'll be kind of looking at a case study of what EMI has partnered with Congo Initiative, specifically through their campus, university campus at UCBC. Some of the goals we have is to understand why it's appropriate, why we need to have contextually appropriate design and construction, and what are some of the factors that influence what is appropriate in some context. What challenges do we encounter in remote developing world conditions of constructing, and seeing some aspects of what makes a great partner for EMI. So a little introduction about myself. My name is Matt Lammers. I'm a structural engineer, originally from Canada. I went to university there and I'm licensed in Ontario. But I've been with EMI since 2013, first as an intern, then as a volunteer for a year, and then on staff. My current role at EMI Uganda is the engineering manager. Here's a picture of my family, my wife Ashley and my two kids, Joshua who's 3 and Abby who's 1. So as we get into this, I want us to start with this question of thinking of why does EMI exist? Why are we an organization? Why do we go and why do we do what we do? So part of that answer is in our mission statement here of developing people, designing structures and constructing facilities that serve communities in the church. And one of the main ways that we do this is through partnering with other ministries. So often our ministry partners have a vision that God's given them, but that involves some sort of facilities, buildings, infrastructure, but most don't have any experience. Some have little experience. Some might have someone on staff. Someone might have nobody that knows what that entails. And so we have this key role that we can fill in taking the vision that God's given a ministry and helping it to become a reality, taking it from someone's head and putting it on paper, taking it from on paper and making it a physical reality. So I want to focus this time on one ministry partner of EMI Uganda's. So the ministry partner is Congo Initiative, which is located in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You can see in the black there in this Central Africa. The country is about a quarter of the size of the US, about 90 million people, and it's considered one of the richest countries in material resources, but in reality one of the poorest countries by the experience of the people. So the ministry is located in eastern Congo, the red dot over here, which is about 50 miles across the Uganda border. So there's Uganda where our office is located, just across here. So how did this ministry start? I'll give a little background of that before we get into the project. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was a war going on in Central Africa, mostly within Congo. As a result of it, about 5 million people died through active conflict and starvation and the results of it. But in the midst of this, a number of Congolese leaders got together to ask themselves these questions of what's happened to our country, where has the church been in this, and how do we move forward from here? And as a result of this, they started this organization, Congo Initiative. And one of the key aspects of that ministry that they wanted to start with was a university. And they wanted to start with this university as a way to distinguish themselves from all the other NGOs that were operating in the country, to show that they were different, that they were this organization that's going to be rooted in the midst of the community, that's part of the community, that's in that context, that they want to be the answer to the community's problems in the midst of it, not an outside entity coming in trying to impose outside ideas. And so one of the problems that they've identified with the country is a lack of leadership. For centuries, leadership has been a problem since the colonial times in Congo. So the vision of the university is to raise up godly leaders, instilling godly values in them, and then sending them out into all parts of society, whether lawyers or business people or politicians, engineers. It's like they want to make this big impact across the nation, and doing that by discipling people, bringing people in, making them, transforming people, and those transformed people go out and transform society. So this is one of my favorite partnerships that EMI Uganda has. And some of the reasons that I get excited about it is, one, this grand vision that they have of national transformation. When you go to Congo, it's often feels like a hopeless place. If you hear any news about it, nothing good comes out of the news. But when you go to this campus and to this ministry, this is a place of hope in a dark place. Another aspect of it is the idea that it's a holistic ministry that doesn't just want to touch on one aspect of it, but wants to address all problems in society, from renewing the church to renewing business to renewing families. It's like they're reaching out and touching all things. And also that it's an indigenous ministry that was started by Congolese, run and operated, and the vision comes from them, but also that they've sought partnership, recognizing that they need to work within the body of the church. And this is where EMI has come in and has partnered with them. So EMI has been involved since 2012. Like most ministries, getting involved with EMI is through a master planning effort. And through that, there's a central building in the campus that we'll spend most of our time looking at, the community center. And then, so here's the original master plan. So the site is 85 acres. Through the middle here, there's actually not a pond yet there, but there's a creek that runs through the middle, separating it to an eastern and western campus. The western side over here is residential, and the eastern side here is the academic. And this building, this large building in the middle, will be the focus of this case study, the community center. So here's a picture of the community center at the time of the master plan. So you can see it's been partially constructed, but at this time construction was on hold due to the funding. Even though it's partially constructed, there's one academic building here, and this is the second building, so this building was being used. All the spaces as they could use them were being used, and we'll touch a lot more on this building as we go forward. And then last year we worked with them to update their master plan as thinking changes and developments happen, to revisiting this and seeing does it align with where the vision is now, and updating it so they have a snapshot in this time of where they're heading to continue to guide them as they develop their campus. So as we turn now to looking at this building, I want us to look at this core value. So we talked this morning about diversity, this core value of design, so that EMI wants to work within the local context. So designing and constructing buildings that are appropriate, that are sustainable, affordable, transformational. We want these buildings to make a difference. We don't want our efforts to be wasted. What I want to focus on is this understanding of local context. To think, well, why do we need to understand the local context? Can't we just come with our skills? Can't we come with our experience and our knowledge and bring that and design and build in another part of the world? So what we'll see through this case study is some of the things that can go wrong when we don't understand the context, and the amount of effort it takes to correct that. So we'll start with the original design. So this building, as I mentioned, when EMI did the master plan, was already there. So there was a U.S. architecture firm that donated the architecture and structural design services. So we appreciate the effort and the heart that they had behind it. This firm was located in the Midwest of the U.S., but lacked some of the knowledge of what is the local context, what's appropriate in this environment, and as a result, it's costed a lot of extra time and money. So as we get more, these are the original plans. So there's a partial walkout basement on the lower level, then the main level, the next upper level, and then a small top level. To give an idea of the scale of the building, the length of it across this corridor is about 300 feet, and the depth this way was about 200 feet. And the auditorium space, the bottom level, the main level, is about 2,000 seats, and the balcony level here was an additional 700 seats. So a large building, and as you can see, not one of the first buildings that they worked on. Some of the issues with this building from a design standpoint is due to the size and scale of this auditorium space, of getting natural light and natural ventilation into that space. So it has an upper level, but a lot of it's surrounded by walls that don't let light in. As a result, to actually make the space quite usable would require some mechanical ventilation, which in this context where power is less reliable would result in the space not being very accommodating at times. Another thing, if we look at these rows of columns here on the balcony, produce some poor sight lines from a lot of the space underneath here. And then these details were pulled from the construction set of drawings that they were using. So there's a lot of detail that was lacking in the drawings. So whether they intended these for being construction drawings or they were just used at them, but when we were looking through this set, thinking there's a lot of assumptions that we need to be made to actually build the building. If you can read down here, the labels for the floors is one example of context. So this here, if you think about what is the floor called that's the first floor above grade? First floor. But what would it be in the US? The second floor. So in Uganda and in Congo, in many places, the ground floor is the floor you walk from grade, and the first floor above grade is the first floor. So while you can build the building from it, that's just an instance of not understanding the context and some opportunity for misinterpretation. So as we turn to some structural details, you can see here a detail of one of the columns. So you'll notice the column is made up of concrete masonry units with grouted cores, with number 6 bars, number 3 ties. So a few things about this that are out of the context is one, the concrete masonry units. That I haven't seen any other concrete masonry units in this area of Congo. So molds were made and they were fabricated on site. As you can see here, the quality of them was quite variable, often quite poor. When we went to look at it, some of them you could just pull off chunks of it. But when you start with columns, or start with the masonry units and then try to make a column from it, then now you have a column that someone's not used to building. And you'll notice that the cores of this don't match the cores of this. So when they tried to grout in there, they didn't use grout, they used concrete, and it left a lot of voids in there. The last thing in here is the rebar. So what is a number 6 bar? So it's 6/8 of an inch, or 19 millimeters. But the typical bars in here are 10 millimeters, 12 millimeters, 16 millimeters. So what is a number 6 bar? So in this instance, this column got built with 12 millimeter bars. So which is about 2.5 times less steel than was required. Then we'll look at the trusses. You'll notice these really nice truss plates that aren't available anywhere else. So they were imported, and a machine fabricated to press them onto the truss, which has created a nice truss, but it's not a sustainable solution, not something that they could take and do somewhere else. And the last thing I want to focus on for the design is seismic. So here's a peak ground acceleration map overlaid over the area from Uganda, but Congo on the border. It's hard to see, but for a 1 in about 500 year return period, there's a peak ground acceleration of 25% G, so not insignificant. To give another idea, up the fault line a bit, there was historically an earthquake of 7.0 magnitude. So there's a lot of consideration that needs to be taken in for that, which the drawings didn't appear to have any details for that, or the design of the beams and columns didn't take that into account, which if you're coming from the Midwest of the US, that's not something you need to consider. So understanding the context and adjusting to where we can see some of the problems it had with. Now we'll turn to the construction. So you see some of the challenges that happen with the construction. Here's some of the challenges problems with the design. Now here's some of the problems with the construction. So one was the experience of the construction management. So this is a large building. But the contractor, the oversight, they had experience with smaller buildings. So when you take the techniques of a small building to a large building, you need to do it differently. Also, throughout the process, the foreman was splitting his time between this project and another one, and then eventually left this project, leaving his assistant in charge. As mentioned, new construction techniques were these concrete masonry units, truss plates, masonry columns. There was no material testing, so concrete strengths were specified in the drawing. There's no indication of what the strength actually was. And then the actual interaction between the design team and the construction team. So the design team from the US made periodic visits to Congo to visit the site, but would notice some issues, highlight them, but by that time it's hard to rectify. And at times the contractor just was interpreting the drawings their own way. So we'll take a look at some pictures. Take a look and see your response to some of these. So the first one here is how the columns were left to receive windows. So there would be tabs put on the windows that would go in there, and they would grout them later. You can see some of the size of the aggregate here. It's about 2 to 3 inches. So some nice large aggregate. Some starter bars from the foundations that are quite short, but also are not in the column. And then significant issues with honeycombing, a lot of voids, and as you can see here, the rebar is just exposed. Here you'll see a large beam. So this is one of the beams for the balcony in the auditorium. So the depth of the beam was a little over 3 feet. And maybe you could notice, but the sides of the beams are not very flat. So what we think happened is as they were pouring the beams with much deeper concrete, the sides of the formwork weren't reinforced enough. So they started bowing out, creating these nice architectural features. But you could tell, as this is one of the earlier beams that they poured, as it went around the building, this improved. So you can tell that they learned from the experience, but from that we could see that they hadn't poured a beam that was this deep. This is a nice splice that should be in here. If the beam was straight, I think it would be across like there. So again, it's got quite a sag from the construction. And here the beams were poured with buckets. So they were mixing them with a mixer in buckets. So because of the size of them, you can see they're poured in several levels, but the top level especially is quite poorly consolidated. And when he took something and knocked against the side of it, it sounded hollow, like it wasn't bonded well together. We have a nice window in our column, so we can let some nice light in there. What's harder to see in this picture is the last girder truss here supporting these end trusses has a significant deflection to it, and the ceiling hasn't been installed yet. So these are some of the snapshots. A lot of this is pretty consistent around the building. Some areas worse, some areas better. But one of the things this highlights is the need to understand who is going to build. To say what is the experience in the area, is a local contractor going to build it? What are they used to building with? How do we design so that they can build that? If something needs to be a larger scale, then where can we get the construction expertise to come and do that? Whether a firm from a bigger city or someone to come and train and teach, but you can see some of these problems that happen of building a building in a context that's not used to it. So that turns us then to EMI's involvement in this building. So as new funds were secured for this building and they were ready to get involved in construction, after EMI had done the master plan, Congo Initiative came back to EMI and said, can you come and help us with this building? Which we were quite reluctant to do. When you look at the building, it was pretty daunting, but because of the vision of the ministry, because of the partnership that we were developing, and the question that we would ask ourselves is, if we don't help them, then who is going to help them with this? And so we first did a desktop study, getting the design drawings from the original consultant, as well as correspondence that they had forwarded us that they had the design team had with the construction team, highlighting some of the issues that they had identified that need to be rectified. So we came with that knowledge and went there for a few days to assess the building, but when we reached there, it was a lot worse than we imagined it would be, as you can see from some of those pictures. So in the end, we'd end up doing two assessments. The first one to kind of get this general feel and general recommendations of how to move forward. And then the second assessment was going to look specifically at aspects of the building to identify what needed to be demolished, what could be fixed, and how could we fix it. So when you look at that, you might be asking yourself the question, why don't we just tear the building down? You look at the size of it and some of the issues with it and say, well, wouldn't it be easier to just start afresh? So some of the considerations that we took into account as we were making our recommendations, as we were assessing it, was one is cost. So what was going to be more cost effective. Another was the complexity of construction. So how can we take this building of what is there and do something with it within the capacity of who's there? A big one was safety, which raises an interesting dilemma as we think about working in a different context of what is safe. How safe is safe enough? What building code do you use? Where Congo doesn't have a building code, so what do we take? If we take a developed building code and we try to adapt it to another context, how do we contextualize it? And who determines what should be appropriate? You think about your own experience to say what you feel is appropriate is what you've been doing, what you've been designing, what you're used to. I think about my experience. I've been in Uganda for about 6 years, and my idea of what's safe enough has adjusted over time to the context there. But if you would ask a Ugandan engineer of what is safe enough, they'll give you a different answer than I give. And so that's a constant question that we wrestle with and struggle with, to say what is safe enough and who should define that. One of the key factors that came into our decision of how to move forward was the investment of the community in this project. So a lot of the initial construction labor, some of the materials, was by the community, as the ministry wants to be in the community, part of the community, in the context. The community was involved in this community center. There was a lot of pride and a lot of ownership over this building. So we didn't take lightly tearing down any part of it. So from that, our philosophy, as we looked at what do we do with this building, was to determine what can we reasonably fix. Even though it may be more costly, it's going to take potentially more time to help advance the mission of the ministry, that's who we are serving. Say their mission is to reach the nation, to reach their community. So as we involve with them, we need to help them to further their mission. And so keeping what we can fix and demolishing what we can't. So here's some of our recommendations. So the first being that in order to start construction again, they needed to have qualified construction management. The drawings needed to be more detailed. So as construction drawings were produced, more detail was needed to give more understanding, which highlights a cultural consideration in how we do drawings. So in the context of an honor-shame culture, it's understood that if I'm the contractor, I should know how to build. If you're the designer, you should know how to design. So at times, if I as the contractor were to ask you questions about your design drawings, it may be shameful to me because it's saying that I don't know how to design the building. And it may be shameful to you because it's saying you didn't know how to design it properly, so now I got to ask you questions. So what often happens then is they take the drawings and take their experience of how to build, and they work with what they have to build something from it. So that's both the need for construction management to make sure the design intent is enforced and detailed enough drawings. We recommended the whole of the auditorium be demolished, which is a significant part of it, and then redesigned, and then the rest of the building to work with what was there to remediate it. So we presented these recommendations, a report to Congo Initiative, and it took them time to digest it. So it was really hard for them to receive, and we could kind of anticipate that was going to happen. During our trips to the site, there was a lot of hope surrounding our presence. So the kind of this underlying idea that the engineers are here and they're going to fix our building. We're going to move forward. So it really weighed heavy on us when we were there to this, what do we do with this building? How do we move forward? How do we share these recommendations? So after several months of them processing through it, they got back to us. But one of the real challenges they were wrestling with is the response of the community, saying this effort that was put in, this ownership, if we now tear it down, is that going to send a message that we haven't valued your input and we're just going to go and do something else? So how the ministry responded to the community of explaining this process was essentially saying the community is more important than our building. To say that the safety and the quality of this building is more important than the money that we've put into it. So though we don't want to tear things down, we're going to. It's going to cost more, but that's what we want to do because we value the community. And so in the end, it was furthering this mission that they had to reach their community. In the end, they accepted our recommendations and said, we want to move forward. We don't know how to move forward. EMI, we'd like you to walk through this process with us. So as we started, it was with a redesign. So here's the redesigned floor plans with the ground floor plan and the first floor plan. So the main modification was the auditorium, so a much smaller space, about 1,000 seats, down from about 2,700. The auditorium separated with spaces around that allows more ventilation to come through, more light. These spaces around here were modified from office spaces to classrooms to kind of meet the needs of the university at that time. And then 2 new areas adjacent to the auditorium space with 2-story classrooms. And then also a significantly smaller balcony on the upper level that allows us not to have any columns along the main space to create this open auditorium. So here's some renderings that our MENA office did as they were fundraising. So you can see the nice open space, the light coming in the sides, some louvers, ventilation through there. Here's the rendering of the building from the outside. So this was, the main auditorium was filling in this whole space here on both sides. So still this is a significant space. And then here's a render of the building within the context of the original master plan. So this, the academic core, the ravine through the middle, and the residential area over there. So how do we go from this building that we started with to this? First step was demolition. So this hatched area here was the whole area that we recommended be demolished at first. So all of the balcony area, as well as the main entrance and these two sides of these wings up here. Here's some pictures of the demolition, with the balcony partly demolished. Here with the balcony demolished and the main entrance being demolition starting. So this is where the building sat for a bit as we thought about construction management. So that was one of the key recommendations, to say don't restart anything until we have someone qualified that can oversee it, because we don't want to repeat our mistakes. So we attempted this through several recruiting trips of getting potential staff members coming to Uganda, presenting this vision, but that didn't produce any candidates. This is a hard context, a French-speaking country, as well as Swahili and other languages, but also a conflict zone. So, but in the end, how we recruited someone was through an intern. So Matthew Lembe is a Congolese who studied architecture within Uganda, and then did 2 internships with EMI Uganda. And once he was finished with that, then as he was looking for work, then we presented this opportunity to him to say, would you be willing to go and help us restart construction and be our representative there? He was quite reluctant at first. He's Congolese, but he's from a different area of the country, so a different tribe, and it's a conflict zone. But nothing else came through, so he said, okay, I'll go for 3 months. He was actually hoping that something else would come up so that he could go. But that 3 months then turned to a year, and then through that time he caught this vision for the ministry to say, I want to be part of transforming my nation, and I can start here with what they're doing here. And then a key aspect to make this construction process manageable was phasing the construction. So we can see one of the phasing plans of breaking up into 9 different phases to, one, make it manageable to start. So start with something small to get experience, to see what it's like, to fit within the capabilities of the contractor that we could find in the area, and also allowing the ministry to fundraise instead of having to raise several $1 million to finish the building, but taking the money that they had, finishing parts of the building so that they can use it, and then continuing to raise funds. So we started with remediation of these 4 classrooms in yellow on the sides here. This area here and here was the only single-story area of the building, so that was the area that we could start with. Since it was single-story, it had the least problems, and that we could remediate. And so also allowed us to test the contractor to see, is this contractor going to be a good fit to work with? And then also for us to learn the constraints of working in this city, in this context. So what does it take to build here? As this was also not our experience of doing construction in Eastern Congo. And so here's some of the details, some repairs of the columns, repairs of the trusses, removing the corridor, putting in infill walls to increase the lateral support, and repurposing the space from offices to classrooms. Some of the construction process of removing parts of the beams, pouring them again. And here the finished, or almost finished part of it. So at this stage there was a renewed excitement. Construction had started. People were kind of getting this hope again to say, yeah, we demolished stuff, but we've now replaced it with something that's better quality, to say this is going to be a good thing. The next stage was actually not with this building at all, but was a tent. So as we were moving to another part of the building, and I mentioned before, this building, though it was unfinished, was being used because any space that was available was needed. So to clear out part of the building, especially the area that they were using for larger gatherings for their chapel, we needed a large gathering space. So while we could have built the auditorium space, because that would have satisfied the need, that would have cost well over $1 million, which they didn't have, and they had other pressing needs for the university for classrooms and offices. So in the end, we went with a tent that they imported from South Africa that cost about $100,000 total with all the site preparation, and the tent itself was about $30,000, which that buys them time to use this space, but also to be able to replace it if they need to in the future. So here's some of the site preparation, a lot of paving stones going down and some of the foundations for the tent structure. And then here's the finished tent. So it's, like I said, 800 seats, and it's used several times a week for university events, for community events. So it's been a great opportunity for them to be part of the community. Next, we demolished the corridor. So the top of the corridor initially was almost 50 feet, and there was not very adequate ties between the different sides of the corridor. So we had concerns about these big masonry panels being unstable, especially with the poor quality masonry units. So we demolished it down to kind of the top of ring beam level for the first floor, and then we poured new ring beams and then built up on top of that to the roof level up here. So you can see in this picture, here's the tent, so quite a large, but not large compared to the building. And here's the finished corridor roof, which this was an exciting stage for the university, as up to this point, there had never been a roof over all parts of the building. So to feel like now it's closed in, we're not deteriorating our spaces by just leaving it. And so the next phase, you can start seeing in here, this is where the auditorium space will go, is these 2 Storey classrooms. The one on this side that was constructed first, and one on this side that actually just started construction a couple weeks ago. So here are some of the stages of it, the preparation of the site. The foundation had gone in and columns, and the preparation for the floor slab. Here the suspended floor slab being prepared, reinforcing being placed. And something you might notice here is the pockets that were put into the walls here. So that was another way that we were stabilizing the corridor walls, by tying this new construction into the existing construction. And here you can see the almost finished classrooms, and here is what it was finished. You'll notice here is that we've stopped right there. The corridor is still going on, so all the construction is kind of phased of what can we do, what can we make usable. So that up to this point, this wing of the building is now usable, and this part will get finished once the auditorium goes in. After this, we had worked on this part of the building, had demolished this. We started turning our attention to the back side of the building. So as with the construction, the design needed to be phased, because our capacity to work on a building of this size, we can't fix the whole thing at once. So we were doing our design in phases 2 to stay ahead of the construction. So at this time, as we moved to the back space, and we were focusing on this area here, asking the university, what is your needs as you see about this building? It was for office space, of having a space in this central building to be a core of the ministry, to be this presence in this building. But this space is about 60 feet across. So we were trying not to put offices in the center, so there's a central atrium here with a clear story to allow light and ventilation in there, and not have stuffy offices in the middle. And then here's the first floor, with again offices around and some flexible space. So as we designed this, the funds haven't been there yet, so we wanted to take that into account to say the needs of the university might change over time, so how can we make this flexible? So we designed a lot of the structure to accommodate walls in various locations and gave them a plan to say this is where you can put walls. When we're ready to build, then let's work within this to fit your needs. But one of the key challenges with this part of the building was how do we get away from too much demolition? So in our assessment of all of these columns going around the building, about 90% of them were identified as ones that needed to be repaired or replaced. And so because we didn't want to demolish the whole space, and that was a request from the ministry to say, we'll demolish it if we need to, but how can we work to keep this? We designed it to be built with a new structure inside of the existing, of basically just counting on the existing columns and beams as part of the wall, and then excavating down to build columns adjacent to the existing structure, tying the exterior footings to the interior footings with strap beams. So it is an effort, but one that we felt was worth it for what the ministry was asking us to do. So then turn our attention, so that's kind of where things are at right now. Construction is still ongoing, but there's been lots of challenges of constructing in this context. One of being quality. So specifically with concrete, as I mentioned in the initial construction, there was no testing because there's no testing equipment in that part of the country. So we produced concrete cubes, which cubes are common in that area as opposed to cylinders. To get the cubes tested, they were put on a car from the university to the border, then transferred from one car to the border across to Uganda, put on another car, driven about 8 hours to our office, and then we took those to a testing lab. So we had lots of issues with construction quality, or concrete quality, both inconsistency and inadequate strength. So twice we stopped construction for a couple of months to try to figure out how can we get good enough quality. The main issue we identified was sand. So here we'll see a picture here of them washing the sand. So there was a lot of fines in the sand, either from a quarry or just dug out of the river. So we found that though it was quite labor intensive washing the sand, we were able to achieve sufficient quality concrete. This area of the country has been quite unstable with ongoing conflicts, rebel groups acting, occasionally killings in the area, as well as political instability. At times we've had our construction manager evacuated from the country, and currently he's not there due to an Ebola outbreak in the region since last year in August. That's hard to get under control. So again, not typical things that we think about how do we deal with construction, but that's part of the reason to be phasing this, to say let's finish pieces that we can, and when things have to stop, they'll stop and the building can be used. Another challenge is with transportation. So this is the main road going from Uganda into Eastern Congo. So this is the transportation road of our construction materials. So this was the bridge collapse at one point. So it's been rebuilt since then, but in the meantime, someone would drive a truck to one side of the river. They'd have all these boats. They'd unload the truck into the boats, take them across, load it in a truck to the other side. And so it's like these things that just happen that you're not expecting. So just understanding what is the context, what are these issues and challenges we can come into play. So as we think about this understanding of context, say, well, why do we need to know the context? We've seen some of these issues here. There's a lot of things that we don't know that we don't know that we don't know. So the question is, well, how do we learn these things? And so two ways that we go about learning this is, one, the integration of local design professionals, both interns and staff and volunteers, to get people that are familiar with designing and constructing that context to be part of our teams. And the other part of it is placing offices in the field. So as our office is in Uganda, we're getting more and more aware of the context, then we can design more appropriately there, as well as all of our other field offices. So hopefully that gives you some insights into some of these challenges that we have of going into different areas of the world, understanding what's appropriate in a context, what can be built, and the challenges that happen when it's not done right, and the significant effort over 7-8 years now to kind of work on this building. Well, thank you all for coming.